All right, guys, it's been a little bit of a rough week, and the reason why I say that is because I've decided to let one of my dream cars go. I'm putting for sale this, my 1994 Toyota MR2 GTS. But it's not all bad. Thankfully, we have a beautiful day. We got the MR2, we got the North Georgia mounts in the back, White Monster, Roberto, and on top of that, we're gonna be driving this 1996 Legacy GT. I'm gonna compare them both, drive them side by side, and see which one I like best. Am I making a mistake by selling the MR2? Let's see. So as you can see, I just jumped in the Legacy, and I love this car. It's fantastic. I'll give some impressions on how it drives here shortly. The other good thing about today was we started the day off really nicely with a car show in Roswell, and we saw, honestly, there would have to be more than 100 cars, and it's kind of like a smaller show, but it's very well curated. It has a lot of nice cars, older, newer stuff, mostly vintage, but the owners are a pleasure to talk to. The quality of the cars is fantastic. I recommend you check it out. Well, now I'm sitting here in the BG-5, so the first impressions before we get into the twisty sides is it's, you know, I rode the MR2 here, so I already have a very direct comparison as far as how they drive in a kind of highway environment. And this particular one, you know, you can tell as soon as you get in it, you're sitting a lot higher. The center of gravity is a lot higher. Granted, this particular car is running on stock suspension versus the MR2, which is running on coilovers. But there's something good about the MR2 in those regards, and there's something good about this one. For this type of driving I'm doing right now, kind of like on the way to the mountains, not so much in the mountains, it's been fantastic because it's very comfortable. It's got great compression for like just comfort cruising, but you know, obviously it doesn't feel as sporty. It doesn't feel as good in terms of like just being a quick handling car as the MR2. With that being said, I do think this car has a couple things or a couple advantages over the MR2. First of all, we just talked about it. It's going to be comfort. It's just leaps and bounds beyond the MR2. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more of a daily while still being holding a little bit of the sporty side, this is really good. Obviously, you have a lot more room. You can fit 4 people in this car. You can only fit 2 people in the MR2, and the trunk is massive, which is a big upside for this car. This one looks incredibly special because it just has this body kit. It has these lights. The wheels are kind of cool and kind of work out very well, but it's not quite the sporty one. They did one that was called the GT-B or the GT Bilstein, and it had coilovers, and I can see why they did that and why that was a spec, an optional spec, is because the suspension on this is incredibly soft. So now we're getting a little bit into the more twisty side of the mountains, and North Georgia has some really good mountains to drive in. Unfortunately, there's always a little bit of traffic. It's just gotten very popular, but it's never a bad place to be. So what do I think about this car as far as driving ability? I think it's very cool. It's very Japanese. It's very Subaru, you know, very Subaru of the 90s too. These cars had this particular feeling about them, which you just don't find anymore, even in new Toyotas, new Subarus or anything like that. Although, you know, Subaru still retains kind of that boxer rumble, that boxer noise that makes them kind of, you know, different than everybody else. But, you know, this is definitely a whole different experience than a newer Subaru. It's kind of cool because, you know, your contact points and the way you sit in the car is just a little bit taller than what I'm used to in some of the sports cars that I tend to drive. And it just, I don't know if this would be a car that I would drive hard in the mountains. Rather, something that I would just go and enjoy casually for a cruise. It has a little bit of a get up and go. You know, I do have a C6 Corvette in front of me that seems to be a C06, and that definitely has a lot more get up and go. But this has enough to get you in trouble, really, because at the end of the day, with a suspension setup, maybe the tire setup, you don't want to be going that fast. Otherwise, you might find yourself in trouble pretty quickly. The good thing about it is, you know, there's one thing I like a lot about it. Even though the suspension is kind of soft, the weight is still light. You know, there's probably a 3,000-pound station wagon, which is actually very light for modern standards. You know, when you start looking at things like R6s, even though if they're like the super light edition or whatever you want to call it, they're going to be 3,900 pounds, 4,200 pounds, 4,400 pounds. Smaller cars nowadays are just approaching that 4,000-pound barrier. So finding a 3,000-pound station wagon is something that's kind of like unique and just different to its era. Obviously, you know, airbags are not really a thing at this time. There's only one, and it's sitting in the steering wheel right here. As a matter of fact, we're kind of having a hard time because we want to replace the steering wheel. It has some wear, but we can't find the steering wheel. You know, that's one thing about Japanese cars, is availability in parts is just a little bit not as good as you want it to be. The car, again, while it's a little bit of a boaty feeling just because of how soft the suspension is, it doesn't mean that it drives bad. 3,000 pounds does still feel light. It feels a lot like the WRX that I drove back in the day. And the fact that the suspension is better, kind of like a more comfortable suspension, it makes for a more pleasant ride. I remember having my NA Miata back in the day, and that to me was a very fun car, even though the suspension could have been a little bit more firm, a little bit more better compression, better rebound. It was just a fun car because it made it very dramatic. The whole thing just kind of wobbled around in a pleasant way, not in a disturbing or annoying way, but rather it's like, oh my god, I'm going somewhere, I'm moving, I'm doing something. And this car kind of gives that vibe too. The engine is a little bit on the weird side because it's got a 2.0 twin turbo, but it's a sequential turbo. So like it basically has two turbines that activate at different points in the rev range. Maybe a smaller turbine to just have a little bit of more torque and get up and go on the lower revs. But when it starts spiking up to the 5,000 RPM range, then the bigger turbo kicks in, and that's where you feel that 256 horsepower that this car is supposed to have. All right, so immediately we jump into the MR2, and it's a whole different experience. It's just a whole different car. For some reason, it just kind of overwhelms the senses, but like in a good way, right? When you're a driver, you want to find that wow factor. Like, I'm actually having a hard time kind of speaking to the camera, and the reason is because I want to drive, I want to move faster, I want to go faster. The car is pushing you to want to do more. So it's like, it's insane, you know. You get in the cockpit and it already looks very different, right? There's nothing luxurious about this. There's no wood trim. The suspension is very different. Obviously, I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but you're sitting much lower. You got this big gauges, obviously aftermarket, but in presentation, it's just like, all right, let's go fight, let's go hit someone, let's go, you know, take over something. And I think that's a fantastic thing to say about both cars. I'm not taking away from the Subaru, but rather just saying, like, the experience is so different than that it's kind of worth having both of them in the stable, in the garage. You know, I think it's not a bad thing if you were to be like, you know, this could be a really good two-car duo. The one thing I will say is, you know, this one has been modified, so it does have sort of things that have been improved upon from stock, and some people might argue that, you know, it's not an original, or it has things that kind of take away from its character, but I think it actually enhances its character. You know, you're taking the things that were sort of like a downfall or like weak points of the MR2, like some of the suspension components from back in the day, and like sway bars, strut bars, you know, you put an exhaust, a blow off. You know, these 3S GTEs are incredible engines, but in their own right, when they're fully stocked, they don't really sound all that good. So now you add the exhaust and it just heightens the senses a little bit more. You know, and this car is very well sorted out. I don't think I'm a big fan of like the fully modified stuff, like highly modified stuff. I think OEM plus, maybe that's like an OEM plus. It's kind of like a sweet spot where it should be. You know, I can hear the intake noise, I can hear the turbo. You could probably hear it too. There's a blow-off valve just going crazy on the back, and you know, I can feel the road a little bit better than I do on the Subaru. Does that make it better than the Subaru? I'll be honest, I don't think it makes it better, it makes it different. I think they're both fun in their own right. Just like this doesn't drive like a Miata, but I can't say I like this better than a Miata. I think it's just as good, it's just a different taste. It's a little bit more scary than a Miata just because of the engine layout, and you can notice that most of the weight is on the back. And with no traction control, you kind of have to be a really good driver if you're really pushing over the edge. The good thing is that I have taken this to the track on a wet track. You know, no real wear on a wet track on these cars, but it kind of tests you what the balance of the car is. And I did find it very manageable, even when you lost traction and you found yourself kind of like, you know, sideways, you know, by a couple feet. So it's definitely not a careless kind of car. You have to be very intentional about what you do with it, because it has a lot of get up and go, but it's definitely quicker than the Subaru, like much faster. If I had to guess, this car is probably no longer a 250 horsepower range. It's probably more so along the lines of a 275, 280, which is very healthy for a car that weighs 2,700 pounds. You know, you're talking 997 Porsche territory when it comes to power to weight ratio. This car, again, we talked about the sitting position. You're sitting a lot lower, center of gravity is a lot lower, and it inspires you to go a little bit faster, but you know, look at where the shifter is in comparison to the Subaru. Whereas I had to feel like I had to reach out to the Subaru. On this one, I have it right at my disposal. It's right next. It's literally, I can touch the shifter and the steering wheel, one with my pinky and one with my thumb, which I think is a great thing, because it means it's meant to go. It's not just meant to get you there. It's not just meant to have you be comfortable in your commute. It's meant for you to get there. Surprisingly, these seats are very comfortable, but also very supportive. So I'm really not like complaining about it at all. It is a whole different experience. Then you add to the fact that the steering is just so much better. This is actually much better than the Subaru because it's so direct, and I love feeling the road on my hands, and the way it handles, it's fantastic. It does want to let you know that it is more weight on the back, which is kind of cool. I have a Lotus Elise and I've driven the Lotus, and I think it's one of the best cars ever, but it's also very rear biased. But this one even more so. I think the extra 750 to 800 pounds over the Lotus make that a little bit more noticeable, but the one thing that makes me feel kind of at peace on this car is the fact that it has a good limited slip differential. So if things were to go sideways, and I know that all the weight is on the back, if you have a basic understanding on how mid-rear cars work, then I think it would be okay, particularly with this generation, which is, you know, already a revised generation. This is a Rev 3 1994. The geometry and the enhancements that they made to them actually made him drive a little bit more predictable and nicer, while still keeping a very, very nice and sporty drive that was very direct. So I'm going through Blood Mountain right now, and I have to say the car is fantastic. Can I push it nearly as hard as I did on my M2 or maybe my R8? Probably not, but I don't need to have a lot of fun. I think I'm enjoying it just as much without having to go be to the walls. It's just a fantastic package overall. The new steering wheel, you know, the gauges, the noise, the looks, the suspension, everything about this car just says, let's go drive. And it really does that very well. It's funny because when I'm in the city, I could technically prefer the Subaru. I think the Subaru is more fun as a city car driver. But if you're in the mountains, definitely, this is a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different experience. So, you know, if you're more into the sporty side of driving, maybe you want to join a club or go to, you know, some car meets or something like that, this car will probably do a little bit more for you than the Subaru will. However, if you just want to be a little bit, you know, unique, more comfortable, have a little bit more practicality, then maybe the Subaru is for you. That's the beauty about cars in general and pretty much everything else. It doesn't have to be an objective truth to it. Yeah, you can put lap times and be faster on different cars and better cars, newer cars, whatever you want to do, but at the end of the day, if it feels good to you, it feels good to you. And some of these cars are just better at awakening those feelings from within you and making you want to drive them more. And this is one of those cars that will get you there. We've been driving about 2 hours now. We've given probably about 150 miles in, a little bit of highway, a little bit of mountains. So drove both of them, give my impressions. What do you think about them? I want to show you a couple of things on each one of them. So let's go ahead and take a look at both cars and kind of what makes them unique. First off, we're going to start with the headlights. On the Legacy GT, we're gonna have regular headlights. However, the previous owner made a really cool mod, and I think it looks great. It's gonna be kind of like the angel eyes from BMW. Not quite, but they look cool. The MR2 has the famous headlights, the pop-up headlights. Everybody loves them. I have to say, I'm a big fan. I love the fact that they have a really cool, like, writing on them. I have no idea what it is, but honestly, if I had to pick between the two, the angel eyes are cool, but this is definitely a lot cooler. In the rear, you're gonna have Fujitsu exhaust on both of the cars, but they look very different. So on this one, you have a single exit that's probably about 6 or 5 inches wide. It's incredible. It sounds great. I actually like the rumble on this one better than the MR2, but let's take a look at those pipes. So we're talking about exhaust, but I do want to mention the tail lights on this car. These are the Rev 3 tail lights. Basically, I have these two Ferrari-looking tail lights, which is pretty cool. But let's look at the Fujitsu on this one, which is not one exit, it's 2 exits. It doesn't sound as rumbly, as distinctive as a Subaru, but it's pretty good. And in this car, honestly, what you want to hear is the intake noise. Under the hood, you're going to look at 2 forced induction engines, but in this particular scenario, you're going to have sequential turbos. So it's a twin turbo engine, 2-liter, 256 horsepower from factory. And what I was talking about earlier, it actually feels very kind of strange because one turbo kicks in at lower RPM, the other turbo kicks in higher RPM. Overall, that provides you a lot more torque throughout the rev range. The MR2 has the incredible 3SGTE underneath. This is an engine that was actually in the Tom Supra from Gran Turismo, if you didn't know that. 2JZ was just deemed too heavy and too fuel consuming, so this one is actually a more efficient engine, lighter and better for road racing. It's got a twin scroll turbo as opposed to the twin turbos. The power delivery is absolutely fantastic. You got an intake on this one. You got several things actually going for it, intercoolers and everything. The intercoolers, instead of being on the top like on the Subaru, you're going to come around this side real quick. And I'm going to show you how cool that is. It's actually the intake. The intercooler on this one is not at the top of the engine, but it's rather on the side of the car because it's rear engine, so it needs to scoop, or it needs to feed through this scoop right here. If you come take a look through, you'll see that it says Trust, and it is a pretty cool brand that is kind of like a sub-company of Reddy. As far as the interior, you can tell that this is very purpose-built. It's got these gauges in here, just basically showing you some turbo metrics. The cluster is very simple. You got RPMs, you got kilometers per hour, you got a little boost gauge, but it doesn't really indicate much. It's more for you to know if there's a failure or not, your fuel gauge and your temperature gauge. So jumping into the Subaru, it's going to be a much more like family-friendly car, or it feels more like a regular car than the Toyota MR2 does. You got a little bit of wood trim on the doors. You got, you know, a bigger steering wheel with an airbag, which I kind of like on the other one because it looks better with the you know, the Momo steering wheel that it has. But you know, it's kind of cool to have an airbag if you're concerned about safety. That's the thing. For the shifter, it's definitely a longer throw, much longer lever too. It's positioned down here, but it's definitely not as aggressive as just say you know, the whole fighter jet thing that the MR2 has going for it. But I do like the fact that you have 2 sunroofs, one in the front, one in the back, and it's very comfortable. It sounds great and is incredibly comfortable. So very different car again. One is very high strung, wants you to go. This one just wants you to kind of float around and cruise and have a good time.
Stick 6 washers in there and call it a day.
And then, you know, let's jump into like who's a fair winner, what looks better. Well, the honest truth is, it's hard to choose. It depends what you like. At the end of the day, you know, this car looks incredibly aggressive with its body kit. You know, it has just a good stance. The lights kind of help it out. I do like the color. The wheels are fantastic. You know, some people around here are actually kind of mistaking it, you know, confusing it with a Stasia, with the Nissan Skyline station wagon. While I did say there's no winner in this case, I kind of have to say I'll go with the MR2. There's just something about it, you know, other than it being my dream car. My dad had one, although he had an AW11. You know, this is kind of have the same DNA, just a little bit different. And being a, you know, the poor man's 348, it's just a fantastic thing that you can get something that looks just as good for, you know, a fraction of the price. You know, you got those pop-up headlights, which I'm a big fan of. You got a beautiful body kit, which doesn't look overly done. It looks very OEM plus. You got a nice wing, which again, it's not overly done. Sounds incredible. Profile's fantastic. The wheels are cool. They're Tom's wheels. I honestly think this car looks just as exotic as anything else out there, and this would be my choice. So what do you think? Which car do you like better?
The MR2.
Why?
I liked how it drove better. I don't know. I didn't like it the very first time I drove it, but today I did.
That's kind of cool. So it's a pretty interesting day. We took out the MR2 for the first time for a long drive. About 200 miles, maybe a little bit more than that. And I feel like the car, obviously reliable, AC worked, brakes worked, everything. It didn't overheat, didn't do anything. So that was very, you know, it's very good. And so did the Subaru did great. As a matter of fact, I think the Subaru is probably a better car for what we did today. But, you know, I learned a couple things. I learned that, you know, the Subaru needs to be driven, or the MR2 needs to be driven different than the Subaru does. And at the end of the day, they're completely different cars, and both of them fantastic. I have to say, if I have to keep one of the two, it'll probably be the MR2, but we're moving into new adventures, so the MR2 is going to go to a new owner, and hopefully they'll enjoy it and appreciate it as much as we have. It's a fantastic car for the money. I honestly can't think of a much better car, and I feel like we're going to get a lot of new cool stuff in the near future, so stay tuned and let us know what you think about our cars and which one you like best, the Subaru or the MR2.